Okay, welcome back to Hanging with Mangg. My name is Mangg. And,
welcome here.
just playing a little bit of 7 Days to Die. One of the best, jankiest games out there.
I really admire it no matter what.
You know, my group of friends and I gone back to this game several times now. It has never not been janky. But it's still a lot of fun. So, this week on this channel, we had RimWorld, as I'm uploading some old partial playthroughs and stuff. Just some more RimWorld content as part of the backlog. And also Pathfinder, another playthrough of Wrath of the Righteous with the Lich Path. Just finished recording another part for that. So that's coming along. You know, Wrath of the Righteous, fantastic game. Best frustrating game I've ever played. So those two things will continue for a little bit until something else pops up that I'm like, yep, this would be a good thing to record. Who knows what it'll be. Also, Two Brothers Play, some Archipelago, and what else? Oh, solo role-making, of course. So, plenty of fun things continue doing. Over on the Exploring series, we had part 2 of Maslow's Fire, which had a very sort of positive end to it. And I started work on SCP-8888 this week, which is a big heist SCP. And it's gonna be probably 3 parts, is my guess at this point. And by that I mean definitely not 2 parts, under no circumstance. Way too long for 2 parts. It's more, is it going to be 3, or will I have to stretch it to 4 because I'm a lazy bastard? I don't know. I'd rather not go to 4. It's always a little excessive. Let alone 5. It won't be 5. You know, we'll see. Time will tell. But certainly at least 1 part dropping tomorrow. See. Yeah, it's the setup. It's the setup for the heist movie. So, you know, it's part 1s are always a little kind of iffy. We'll see. And there's that. Part 2 will be next week. Part 3. So on and so forth. I also did an interview yesterday. The Spanish-speaking branch of the SCP Wiki, SCP-ES, they had what they were calling the SCP-ES Con, which was really just kind of, I guess, a meetup at a convention in Mexico City, Necronomicon. And so they had asked me, you know, a while back if I wanted to come on during the stream and do an interview. And like all things that people ask me to do, I say yes, of course. Because my mother has just sort of bred this compulsive behavior into me, in which she can just never say no to people for fear of disappointing them. No, it's not for fear of disappointing them. I mean, not really. It's because it's a nice thing to do. That's always the explanation. And it is a nice thing. People do appreciate it. So, why wouldn't I? And, not to slander anybody or anything, but, you know, apparently they did ask the Volgan to do it. I don't know if they asked the Volgan first. I didn't ask that. But, you know, he turned him down. Apparently he said that, you know, he wasn't their guy for this, you know, for this Spanish convention. Presumably because he does not speak any Spanish. And also because he has not covered any Spanish language SCPs. Well, guess what, Volgan? I've not covered any either, and I don't speak any damn Spanish either. But I've got fans down there, and I'm certain he's got fans down there. And people just like to, you know, hear from you. See you kind of participate. So, you know, after doing the interview and everything yesterday, I don't think there was anything preventing him from doing so. So I'm just gonna put that out there. No, I mean, obviously, had I not been the type of person to just say yes to everything, I probably also would have considered just saying no. Because, like, yeah, I mean, the stream had like 10 viewers, you know, and there was probably just like a dozen people there, so it was not a big event of any kind. But I've done interviews for people for like high school projects or something where they're just like, please, you know, I'm doing this project for my high school final. I'd love to get an interview with you. It's like, sure, man. Who am I to say no? So anyways, I was actually not the only American that was being interviewed. There was an author, Yossi Posi. Yossi Posse. Apparently it's Yossi Posi. So I don't know how they specifically landed on him. As far as, like, did they ask a bunch of authors and he was the only one that agreed? Or, does his work specifically resonate with the Spanish-speaking community? I don't know. But he was the only other American there. North American, I should say. And, yeah, it was a pretty interesting little experience. Partly due to me not really understanding what time zone Mexico City is in. So I thought it was happening an hour before it actually was happening. And then I mean, it was a very amateur production. Not that I would really expect much else. I mean, basically all the interviews I've done have been quite amateur production. But, yeah, I mean, I when they first asked me, I was like, yeah, I can probably do that, you know, depending on the time of day. And they had said 3:30 Mexico City time or whatever. Or MX Center time or something, I don't know. And I thought that was 3:30 and I thought that was fine. And then 3:30 rolled around and I went on their stream and they were just like playing Call of Cthulhu. So, obviously no interview at that point. And then 4:30 rolled around, they're like, okay, time for the interview. And they said, we're doing 6 interviews. And that, you know, all of this was just news, you know, on the day of. And they're like, okay, and the order of interviews is going to be this. And it's just like... So, you know, if I was the last person to be interviewed, I'd have to wait for 5 other people now to be interviewed first before it was my turn. And it's already 4:30. I only had till like 5:30. This is all information that should be communicated at least, you know, a few hours in advance, day in advance, week in advance. But, alright. Fortunately, I was second. I was behind Yossi, so... you know, I listened to his interview, and it was pretty humorous because, you know, they were conducting this over the stream using their phones, and then the girl interviewing was also doing translation work, you know, because Yossi and I obviously were speaking in English, but they had a, you know, sort of a primarily Spanish-speaking audience, so, it was all kind of muddled and a little confused, and then they were like joking around in the background a little bit and making some comments that, you know, we couldn't really hear or understand, but there was a bunch of laughter, and it was like, what is happening? And then, you know, Yossi, much like myself, I'm not really sure of how much you're meant to talk before, you know, waiting for the translator. So, yeah, I mean, it was a little muddled. And, you know, one of the people running it, you know, the girl kind of running things, I mentioned this before, but she interviewed me. She did the interview like a month back. She did like the entire full interview. And it's like, I feel like you could just kind of like play that. I mean, afterwards, you know, there was some like questions from the audience, sort of, but still. Uh, so, yeah, I mean, the actual interview that I did was fine. You know, it's kind of all the usual questions that I get asked of how did you discover SCP? What's your favorite SCP? You know, things like what do you like to read otherwise? You know, what aspects of SCP really are of interest to you? You know, stuff like that. So that's why I'm never too kind of like
Gratitude and safe travels,
nervous or
friend.
anything about any interview because it's usually just the same stuff. That's why I can kind of see like actors and stuff just kind of staying out of all the public eye and not doing interviews or talk shows or anything like that. It's just like, let me do like one big article. Let's do one big article in in like Esquire or something. I don't know. Just let's do one. And then, you know, if anyone wants to know information, they can just go back to that article. But, you know, again, I can't say no, so I wouldn't be very good at that if I was a famous actor. Be given interviews to every little, like, local TV station and stuff, you know. But yeah, so that was interesting. That's kind of all there is to say about that. So, solo role Mangg. We started out in the manse, still the Hellbug manse, and we had just done the kind of big battle. And I had grabbed a map, you know, just a map online of like a big manse that I could use for our purposes. And then I was like, well, we could just head straight down to the basement and get to that sort of encounter that I had some basic plans for. And I was like, okay, well, you know, we got this map here, so why don't we just play this out, you know, and move around the map, and then we'll make a roll to see if there's actually any bugs here or not. And of course, we go into the first room next to where I was, and there's a bunch of bugs. Like, I rolled, like, strong yes on whether or not there was bugs. So I'm like, okay, well, I need some, like, I kind of need maybe a reason why these bugs didn't come in and join the others in this big brawl. So maybe these are, like, really big bugs, like size 2 bugs that couldn't fit through the door. And so we came up with the Lady Hellbug, which is just a giant ladybug. And turns out that ladybugs, I guess, can shoot toxic blood out of their knees. So we incorporated that aspect into the Lady Hellbug. And So I was like, well, one lady hellbug is kind of boring. No one ever wants one of a creature. We'll put 2 in there. But then, it's just 2 big bugs. That's kind of not very varied. Let's put in 4 hook scuttlers as well. This would be my downfall. Hubris, of course. You know, confidence is a slow and insidious killer. So, yeah, you know, I had my 6 guys, and I made the very foolish mistake. I don't know what I was thinking. This was just a lack of critical thinking. I had all the guys move into the small cramped room with the giant ladybugs that could spew toxic blood from their knees and, like, slam their wings outward in close quarters. It was like throwing in with a bull in a china shop. 2 bulls in a china shop. It was not good. It was not good. So, yeah, obviously, I mean, we were all kind of lined up in the hallway there near the door, so toxic blood hit, and that was quite bad. And it only got worse from there. And eventually, you know, we didn't kill either Lady Hellbug, and just myself and one of the goons survived. Not too pretty. So I decided after that, like, we're kind of done with this place. This is shit. I hate this. Oh, God. Oh, God. We got trouble. I have to deal with this while I'm trying to tell this story. I should probably just log out, to be honest. Rather than deal with this, and it's all very loud, so it's not very good. This is not a good hanging with Mangg event. Anyways, I decided that me and this survivor, this one other guy, we're going to be buddies. And I'm going to make this guy an actual sort of player character. I'm going to make him a level 1 character. It's all so loud. So that introduced us to Gerald, who is now a level 1. Oh, we're done. Good. Gerald, the level 1 warrior. And so I'm level 2. He's level 1. He's not quite on par with me, but he's a... Oh, fuck. Jesus Christ. He's a lot, oh, she summoned another wave, didn't she? He's a lot better than he was as a brigand. So, it's gonna end up being a big help. And so we had to spend some time just kind of like making him as a character. And we didn't really get a whole lot else done. We went back to town and kind of rested up, healed up, got ourselves a pint at the old pub. And then we checked the local billboard. Just to try and get some new quests, some new bearings for us, you know, that are dealing with hellbugs. We're done with hellbugs for now. We didn't really accomplish anything with hellbugs, but we're done with it. And so then, you know, I spent some time looking over like random quest generators or random side quest generators. And I think there's probably... Oh, God. What we probably could do is, like, I actually just develop, like, a plot. As if I were DMing. You know, we don't have to flesh out everything or anything like that. But we could just kind of think of a plot. Or just think of, like, maybe a series of plots that we could connect. Rather than just doing everything off the cuff like I have been and just, like, rolling on random tables. Like, I could actually put some thought into our game. And say, like, okay, you know, this is happening here. And, you know, there's been, like, this kind of public requests for assistance with this thing, and then that is actually connected to this other thing. And I don't have to, again, like, come up with everything and write all this out like a book. I could just say, you know, big picture, like, this is connected to this, and this location, and these creatures, and blah, blah, blah. And then just kind of work our way through it. But having some framework in mind. I feel like that probably exists in some way. I mean, yeah, so obviously part of the issue is that I'm the DM and the player. I can't know everything. Otherwise, it kind of ruins some stuff. But like if you take like Lost Mines of Phandalin as an example, that is a series of plot points.
Great weather we've been having.
And I guess you could do like...
Peace be with you, my friend.
I don't know. It's hard because I can't plan anything that's going to be like sprung upon me. That just won't work. So like Lost Mines of Phandalin, or Lost Mines of Phandelver, or whatever it is. It starts, you know, with the players kind of just going along, thinking they're just doing this escort thing, and then they get ambushed by goblins, you know, on the road near Phandalin. And they kind of discover that the goblins are involved with the disappearance of this guy that hired them to do this escort. So they kind of pursue the goblins because of that, because they're concerned about this guy. And you're supposed to kind of work it into the backstory that he's like an old acquaintance of theirs or whatever. So I couldn't plan an ambush. So we'd have to kind of ignore that part. But you could change it. I mean, you could just skip the ambush and say that, like, oh, you know, a messenger comes in and this dwarf that was apparently found this secret, this lost location to this magical mine. He has apparently gone missing, and these goblins are responsible. And that way you still would end up at the cave where the goblins are, and you'd still have the same information and same assumptions, and you'd still go in to deal with the goblins. You'd just skip the ambush. So, and then you'd move on, and you'd go to Phandalin, and you'd learn about the brigands in Phandalin. And again, like, you wouldn't have them... I mean, you could have them, like, approach you in the street once you're in Phandalin. It's not really quite an ambush And I could just, you, as a solo player, you could just do some rolls to see, like, when you go out on town, do you get, approached by these guys or not? And that way you're never quite sure when it's going to happen, or you could just be preemptive and go to them, which is sort of the same thing as if you're playing it normally. And then you kind of have to, you find out, that there's this black spider individual, and, the goblin castle is involved, and there's these various locations, and you could kind of just somewhat just have that all in mind as a solo player without fleshing out too much of it. And I'm just using this as an example of something that we could just kind of prepare, some sort of plot line. The only issue is, like, I'm also DMing for another group of people, and I barely prep for that. I'm not that big on prep in general. So I don't know. I might try and look around to see if there's just, like, almost like just like campaign outlines, really. That's kind of what we're just looking for. I guess, again, going back to Lost Mines of Vandelver, does knowing the identity of the black spider from the start Nah, not really. The big thing with that is finding out the location of the Wave Echo Cave, where the finale is all located. And even if you, as a DM, know that it's here, your player character would still have to find that information out somehow. So you'd still have to kind of go through the steps to discover the location somehow. So, yeah, I mean, I guess just having a campaign outline or, like, an adventure outline, you could still make it work, and it would give us a little bit more structure of, like, a plot than the sort of just wandering random side quest thing that we've been doing. So I don't know. I'll think about that. But anyways, the side quest that we did get was from a consortium of merchants to go kill the goblin chieftain in the quarry. Because those goblins have been causing a real ruckus. So they want they want the goblins to be dispersed. And so they figure the most direct, provable way to do that is just bring them the chieftain's head. Because you're not going to get the chieftain's head without kind of going through all the other goblins. So at that point, the job will be pretty done. So Gerald and I are going to take on this mission of getting the goblin chieftain's head and dispersing this camp of 42 goblins. I'm not quite sure exactly how we're going to do it, how it's going to go. It may very well be the death of us, but that's okay. That's adventure. So yeah, that's how that's going. For my family game, they're in the midst of this kind of grand scavenger hunt to save the world. And they were in the forest after having just killed a bunch of goblins and the big goblin battle we did. So they were on the hunt for red caps. That's why they came to this forest. They need a red cap's cap. And they were tracking them, and I think they did another kind of lore roll to learn more about red caps, finding out that they're just like insane homicidal maniac fairies that just stab people. And so, they followed the tracks, and they get up to this like sort of small area of like ruined, like very ancient ruins, just like some partial walls and stuff. Nothing really structured here. A lot of shrubs, some rotten barrels, things like that. And they kind of see some of the shrubbery rustling. And they hear like some insane maniacal laughter echoing from the trees around them. And so it's like very clearly that. So I gave them the leaves rustling to let them know that, like, hey, there's something here, you know. And then I gave them the insane maniacal laughing to make it pretty clear that these creatures, the insane homicidal maniac fairies, know that they're there. They wouldn't just randomly be laughing within earshot of these very loud, talkative group of 7 adventurers, you know? So I made it pretty clear that, like, okay, you are not being stealthy. No one ever mentioned being stealthy, you know? They were just tracking them, and then they came up here. So at that point, I thought I was pretty clear that they were seen. And I had also informed them, through their lore roll, that red caps are rumored. And anytime, you know, most DMs say something is rumored, that means it's just true. The red caps are rumored to have, like, a bad word. Like, each group of red caps has their own bad word. And once... If anyone in the vicinity thinks of that bad word, they can, like, teleport. And I was pretty clear, I was pretty transparent about the mechanics here, where basically, you know, since we can't decide, really, we can't adjudicate what your characters think. Instead, if any player says the bad word out loud, it's counted as your character thinking. Catching some of this while you wait for your flight back home. Yeah, I missed you. I missed you during the actual session, dude. Crazy stuff going on for my solo game. So I was pretty transparent about the red cap mechanics, and they were, you know, I figured they understood it all. These creatures can teleport on a whim. And so at that point, they're like, okay, we're gonna take our sleeping potion. And a while back, I had given them this magic bag that could turn anything they pour into the bag into, like, a piece of bread that has the object, like, baked into it. So they poured their sleeping potion into the bag to make a sleeping biscuit. We just throw that ahead into the ruins. And I'm like, okay. It seemed kind of like they didn't think that they were being seen. That they were being stealthy. And that these creatures were just hanging around laughing maniacally. So I'm like, okay. And then they're like, okay, and then we creep up by the ruined wall, you know, and we're like sneaking up behind it. It's like, oh, okay, now you're being sneaky. And I had already picked the bad word for this group, obviously. It was going to be red cap. Very basic, you know. I don't know if it's obvious. You know, no bad word is going to be obvious for the first time they encounter it. But I tried to be, like, pretty obvious with, like, during the battle that ensued. If they actually said the word red cap out loud. Like, I was pretty much like, oh, they all vanish. You know, I tried to be as sort of obvious as I could. But they were saying the word a bunch, like, in the lead up to the battle. So as they're sneaking up, they're like, yeah, okay, we got to get that red cap's cap. You know, they were saying stuff like that. So obviously I had them teleport like behind the group in the shrubs. You know. And then yeah, I really gave them like what I thought was an abundant amount of time to figure out that they were seen, that these creatures could teleport and like to ambush, you know, groups, jump out. I thought I mentioned how they like to jump out and like stab people in the head and stuff. So I tried to give them a bunch of time. I gave them the rustling leaves, the laughter, you know, and I did give them a chunk of time where the red caps could have jumped out, but I was like, I'm gonna let them stew a little bit more. Maybe they'll do something smarter than this. But then eventually it was just like, okay, you know, they were like, okay, we wait by the wall. And it's like, all right, well, you had all your chances. So the red caps all just jump out on them. And yeah, the fight was probably a little much. It was probably a little overtuned. You know, when they get these ambush surprises, they all get like 2 boons on their attack rolls. And I rolled like a motherfucker. Like, it was insane how well I rolled. I didn't roll under like a 13. Almost at all. So everyone got hit except for I think 1 person. And I was not rolling for damage. I was just using averages. So I had 4 splotch caps, 2 red caps. The splotches were hitting for 5 on an ambush, and the red caps were hitting on 8 on an ambush. And these characters only have like 20 health or something. You know, the tanks, they're level 2 now, so it's not that much. So it was kind of a massacre. And once it's set, it's kind of hard for a DM to just be like, oh yeah, they decide to let you live. You know, you have to really pull stuff out of your ass if you want to save your party. So I was like, this seems like a TPK. I feel like this is really a TPK. They had 2 people down. They had like a few more people at very low amounts of health. And I was like, I don't know how we're going to magic our way out of this situation. I obviously like 2 red caps alone probably would have been like an okay fight. They would have very judicially used their teleports whenever they could, ambushing different people to weaken everybody, but then probably died. But no, the 6 ambushes, you know, because I ambushed them initially, and then they said red cap, so I teleported them away, and then they ambushed a second time. And by that point, it was like, I don't think I can do that a third time without just doing a TPK. So things were looking real dire. I was like, this is probably going to be a TPK. And then someone else said red cap again. So I had them all teleport away. And then I was like, okay, this is my moment of sort of DM Deus Ex Machina that I can pull. No one at the table is a real stickler for rules and the timing and stuff and turn order. So they just kind of started doing some actions. And they probably, you know, should not have been able to do all the actions that they did before the red caps would have just jumped out again. But I was like, alright, yeah, sure. So they started getting a couple of people up. And then the wizard of the party wanted to use his glamour spell to create an illusion of like a roaring owlbear and stuff to scare off the red caps. And I did roll for like their morale, you know, to see if they actually are scared and run away. And obviously I fudged one of the numbers because fuck it. And so, you know, they were hidden at the time, so it was just like, okay, I mean, you don't see anything happen. So they just kind of were like very paranoid that they were just going to get jumped out at again, but they quickly patched people up and ran out of there, and they did manage to get one of the caps. They killed 1 red cap, So they got a cap and they booked it out of there, and I was like, okay, they maybe they've learned a slight lesson, probably not, but they had a very terrifying encounter with the red caps. They'll remember them, probably, and they got what they came for. I'd rather not cause a TPK with this group at this time. TPKs are kind of an essential aspect of RPGs. Like a fantasy D20 sort of RPG. Like, the threat of a TPK has to be there. If your DM just always saves your asses through some nonsense, then, you know, you never care about risks or not taking risks. But yeah, for this group at this point in time, I think it would have been really demoralizing rather than, like, a lesson to be learned from. So they decided then as a group they wanted to go back to Staunton, the capital city. They were scared of everything out here, so they just wanted to go back to the city. And, oh god, this is where the troubles really began. They get back to the city. And they go to the shops. And the first thing that happens, really, is the barbarian goes to the shops. And wants to trade her crossbow for a bow. And wonders how much, like, sort of, she would have to pay or something like that. You just wanted to, or how much they would pay her, you know, as she wasn't really sure, like, of the value of things. Even though I had, you know, definitely given out the sheets of the equipment lists and stuff like that. So they had the shopping list all in front of them. And I was like, I was not really planning to screw over or anything like that, or rob, you know, rip her off. But then she has a habit when she's just playing of saying, I'm a barbarian, you know, as if that's like a big explanation for anything. She's like, well, you know, I'm a barbarian. And so then I'm like, okay, this shopkeeper is just going to think that she's like some dumbass, wild, yokel sort of person and doesn't know the value of anything. And doesn't know that the crossbow is twice as valuable as a bow. So he's like, oh, well, I mean, with the trade-in, I could probably let this bow go for maybe a silver piece. She's like, I'm a barbarian. I'm trying to save the world, and he's like, maybe I could go down to 8 copper. And she's like, I think she ended up giving him 1 copper. For some reason, I didn't catch it till, like, afterwards. I guess she only gave him 1 copper. But still, I mean, she got massively ripped off, obviously. And so then another character was, like, asking about buying a longbow or something like that. And then I was just like, I mentioned all the prices for a bow and crossbow. And then everyone else at the table was like, oh, wait a minute, you got really ripped off. That guy ripped you off. And so she like went into a rage and started just like knocking everything on the shelves down and just like screaming and that you know, he robbed me. And so the guy, of course, felt quite threatened by this wild person. So he called for guards, and the guards came in, and you know, she didn't really back down. So, yeah, they ended up handcuffing her and about to take her down to the guardhouse for, you know, causing a scene and damaging property and all that. Because, of course, the guy was going to press charges. And then another player decides that while the guards are preoccupied, he's going to steal some healing potions. And of course, he completely botches his roll, even though I gave him a boon on the roll. So he completely botches that. The guards seize and shout for him, and they put handcuffs on him. And then Lego steps in to try and be like the lawyer and tries to talk to them and get, you know, them released. And they decide, okay, they'll release one person. It's like, you know, why would the cops ever make such an arrangement? They're like, okay, you can pick one. And so, of course, they don't pick the barbarian because, you know, no one really likes the barbarian character. Just causing a scene all the time. So the barbarian gets taken back. God damn it. God damn it. Fuckers come in out of nowhere. I'm just gonna log out. I'm gonna log out. Okay, that's better. So the barbarian gets taken to the guardhouse, thrown in a jail cell, and she continues to like scream and you know, sort of slam against the bars and yell how innocent she is and how she was robbed. So a bunch of the guards come in with their clubs and just beat the shit out of her. Just knocking her unconscious. I probably should have given her an opportunity if she wanted to like fight back and try and break out, because that would have been an option. But you know, we were all just kind of laughing, so things moved on. And of course, all her money was taken by the corrupt guards. I mean, this is the capital city. This is the biggest corrupt guards in the whole corrupt guard union. So the others all do their shopping and stuff like that and just kind of ignore the barbarian, who's now just been beaten into silence. And they decide to go back to the museum because they really want to try to get this emerald out of the museum. Because after I talked to them last time, you know, about how they didn't really try anything. They could have tried this or this, blah, blah, blah. So they go back to the museum and they try and talk to the curator there. And my mom says that she knows the curator because she's a folk healer, and one time she saved his mom's life when she was very ill. And it's like, this is kind of ridiculous. And I gave her a roll, like a challenge roll with one bane, and she rolled well, so I was like, all right, fine, you know, he knows you. And her and Lego gave this whole spiel about the end of the world and how they need the emerald, and they spoke to this great wizard Artemis, and this is for a ritual, and blah, blah, blah. And I had him go through, you know, a bunch of different roles. And in the end, yeah, I was hesitant to just hand over the emerald. Because I did price it at like 5,000 gold pieces. Like, it's insanely valuable. But I at least applauded like actual like sort of role playing and dialogue and trying something to accomplish something, rather than just like, oh, we can't beat this thing over the head, let's run. So I gave, you know, he's like, okay, come back at midnight. And they promised that they would go to the cave where the other emerald is supposed to be and get that one and bring it back and give it to him. I don't know if that will ever happen, but sure. Then, in the meanwhile, before midnight, they went to the guardhouse. They talked to the guards about, you know, getting her released. And he's like, oh, well, you know, the guy's pressing charges, so if you can get him to drop the charges. But there's still some other stuff, you know, public indecency and resisting arrest, you know, it's tough. So they go back and they go to the guy and they pay for the damages, and, you know, the Lego is really nice to him and helped him clean up and So he agreed to drop the charges, and then they go back to the guards, and they basically just like convince the guards, like, look, dude, you don't want this wild person in your jail cell. Let us just take her out of there. The guy dropped the charges, and so I had him roll, you know, again to convince them, and they did. So he's like, all right, get this thing out of here. You know, they had beaten the shit out of her. They had taken her money, so they were done. Also, they wanted to get another one of their scavenger hunt items, the breath of a dying man. And this was the most sort of like vague kind of metaphysical one I put on the list. And had they said to me like that any one of them just breathes into a jar and caps it, and that's the breath of a dying man because we're all dying, you know, eventually, like if you had made that argument to me, I would have said, yep, that works. I would be perfectly fine with that. And they did get into a little debate of like, do we need to get like the guy's last breath or just like one of his last breaths? You know, like he's on death's door. So they were kind of leaning in that direction of being able to make that argument, but they didn't quite get there. Now, if I actually needed like a guy's last breath, I'd probably go to where like they do the hangings or the executions. And then maybe just like come up with some little device to like strap a jar to this guy's face and his mouth and talk to the officials there and maybe pay them off just a little bit and just be like, look, we're doing this magical ritual. You know, we need the breath of a dying man. We need his last breath. So do you mind if we just put one of these on this guy? I'll pay you 5 silver. They would have taken that, you know, of course. And you would have gotten the guy's last breath. But instead, they had the idea to go to a hospital and, you know, get to a dying man and get his one of his breaths. And, you know, it's an okay idea, I suppose. I guarantee if you go out into the slums anywhere and pay a person like a copper to go visit like their old relative who's dying in bed, you probably could have just done it that way. If that was like sort of the angle you wanted to go with. But they went to a hospital, and they went, 2 of them, my mom and my brother-in-law, went out behind the back of the hospital and waited for someone to leave, which was a nurse. And my mom starts talking to the nurse about saying how she wants to work here. And then my brother-in-law sneaks up behind her and slaps some manacles onto her wrists behind her back. And the woman, of course, starts screaming for help. And while doing so, my mom pours a sleeping potion down her throat. And I'm like, okay, this is... you know, and everyone was getting some good chuckles out of this, because my mom is very much, like, not... You know, she's very much like the sweet old lady sort of type. So this is quite out of character for her. But that, you know, she's playing a character. I'm like, okay, she slips unconscious. And then I had someone roll a d20 just to see, you know, if anyone heard it, basically. Just a random chance sort of thing. A deterministic kind of, you know, die. And, of course, they did not roll well. So I'm like, okay, you know, she's on the ground now. And you start to hear the back door to the hospital open. You know, you start to hear it open up. And my brother-in-law is like, okay, I grab her, I throw her behind the dumpster, and I take off the manacles, and I dump some alcohol on her body. Or, like, I think you want, like, to put the bottle in her hand, you know, like that she's passed out drunk. And I'm like, that's a lot to do in the time it takes to open a door. So I had him roll an agility check with, like, 4 banes. And, of course, he rolled like a -5. He rolled abysmally. So it's like, okay, the door opens and there's a doctor there, and he just sees you like holding her ankles or whatever, and you're trying to drag her away. Like, that's as far as he got. So he's just like, they're both just like standing there in silence looking at this scene for a moment, and that's when my mom from behind the doctor knocks him out with the hilt of her sword. And I'm like, okay, I gotta give you corruption for this. I mean, this is not what good people do. So she took a corruption, but they knocked out the doctor, and she took the nurse's clothes, and she went in, and she went into a patient, and like she was chatting with this woman who was sort of like sobbing next to her dying father, and she's like, oh, you're, oh, let me see, he does not look good, and she's just like, she just starts crying more. Just terrible bedside manner. But yeah, she gets the guy's breath, and she gets out of it. She bumps into a doctor on the way out. She comes up with some hackneyed story about how another nurse like hired her temporarily, even though that's wildly just ridiculous. But yeah, some more rolls. She gets out of there, and they get out. They just run away, and they got the breath. And it's like, okay, there's like a billion ways that could have been so much easier and less painful for everyone involved. But all right, it's some creative thinking. I'll give them that. So they go back to the museum at midnight, and I'm like, I just said to them, like, there's like 100 ways that I could just complicate this, and throw like some wrenches in the engine, so to speak. The guy could have like double crossed them and like, decided that it wasn't worth it, and he notified the guards, and they're all waiting there, or there's like some bandits that have been trying to steal the emerald and overheard this or something. All sorts of different things I could do, but it's tough for me to be really mean to this group because they're all kind of dumb and bad. So they struggle enough without me really like throwing things at them. So Lego, when they get to the back door of the museum, he does use life sense, which was smart of him, to see if there was an ambush waiting. But there wasn't. It was all on the level. So the guy, the curator, we decided was a halfling, sort of the typical, like, very short, slightly rotund, older, bespectacled, curator of a museum named Richard. And he's got a little box there for them with the emerald. Not a little box, but a box with the emerald. And my mom is like, she gives him a big hug, and she's like, you don't understand how much this means to us. We're gonna get that other emerald for you. We're gonna pay you back. And, the guy's like, oh, I'm probably gonna hang for this. And Lego, whose backstory includes being a detective, is like, do I know as like a detective, knowing some of the law, is he gonna hang for this? And I said, that if they determine that he was responsible for just giving away the emerald like that, worth 5,000 gold pieces, yeah, it's probably an executionable offense. If they, trace it back to him. I mean, he's going to have a cover story of some kind that it was stolen or whatever, but yeah. And so then they used their one question for God for the session to ask me, what would be the best way to sort of like help his cover story, help, cover this up so that he doesn't get hanged. And the question was a little kind of vague and open-ended. There's obviously a bunch of different ways they could help out, but they asked for like one way. So I said, well, knock him out and trash the museum. Make it look like a robbery. And so they, oh yeah, okay, yeah. So we just gotta like, rough Richard up a little bit. And so my mom just immediately was like, I'm sorry, Richard, but we gotta do this. And she just like sucker punches him in the face. And so, yeah, we all got a massive laugh about that, of her just like uppercutting the shit out of this little halfling and just like rocketing him out of his shoes. Just cleaning his clock completely. Because usually I was like, you didn't make it look good. Like, you actually just did it. You just knocked the shit out of him. You didn't like communicate like, hey, if we really want to make this work and kind of help you out, like, we kind of do need to make it look like we roughed you up, knocked you out. No, it was just like, sorry, buddy. Boom. So still, I was laughing about it hours later because it's really funny. Because coming from my mom, if it was the barbarian, it wouldn't be quite as funny. My mom's really going down the slippery slope now. So of course she just knocks the shit out of him. And he's out cold. But then they decide, like, okay, how do we trash this place? And they go over to the exhibit where the emerald was, and they can tell that the magical alarm was disabled for this exhibit, but not for other exhibits. And so they just kind of like take the glass case off the exhibit and put it on the ground and stuff. That was basically it. They took the glass case off the exhibit and they knocked Richard out. And then Lego was like, okay, as a detective, you know, would I buy this scene? You know, if I came in here investigating, would I buy this guy's story that the emerald was stolen and he was knocked out? And I said, it's really improbable that if you had the capability to disable the alarms on these exhibits, that you would only take one emerald. Especially because, like, nearby there's, like, this ancient crown, and there's also, like, a 10-ounce citrine nearby that's worth, like, half as much as the emerald. I mean, you would probably take multiple things. Like, this is your chance. And I think they kind of agreed with that, but they also just weren't sure. Because they weren't sure if he had... Like, they weren't sure how to disable the alarms. They weren't sure if they should just trigger the alarms and say, fuck it, and run. You know, something like that. And I had decided that he has, like, this magical stone in his pocket that if they hold it up and they say the code word, it will disable the each alarm or re-enable the alarm. So they ended up searching his pockets and they found the stone, and I explained that to them, but obviously they didn't know the code word. And yeah, they probably shouldn't have knocked the guy out first. This is what I'm talking about of lack of planning. This is what happens when you just ad-lib everything as you go. You get into situations like this. Had they just conversed with him and said, like, okay, how do you disable the alarms? You know, how do we make this look good? And blah, blah, blah. He could have, like, helped them and gone over everything and set it up perfectly. But everything was fly by the seat of your pants, and they knocked the shit out of him. Maybe the next thing he was going to say was like, okay, now we need to make this look good. So I'm going to give you this stone. The code word is blah, blah, blah. And you should probably destroy a few other things and maybe take a couple other exhibits, you know, just in case. A couple of the least valuable stuff or whatever. But no, they just knocked him out. So they got the stone and they're like, okay, that's good enough. We've got the stone. So, you know, that'll make it look good. And I'm like, okay. I mean, it's assumed that you know the code word. I don't know how taking the stone makes it look any more real. They didn't do anything else. They just left. So I gave them another D20 roll just to see if this guy ends up being hanged. And they rolled well enough. They rolled like an 18 or something. So I was like, all right, you know, he's fine. He does not end up being hanged for this. And that made them all feel a lot better. And they rode out of town. And that's where we ended the session. So it was certainly a more eventful one, a more interesting one. Almost a TPK, you know, almost losing their barbarian in jail and all that. And some interesting ideas, people being knocked out. They're on their way to playing a cyberpunk game, I guess. But, yeah. So we'll see. I think next week we might be playing without a couple people. And I think they were talking about maybe going to that cave to get the other emerald now for some reason. And I set up that cave already. It's a kobold encampment. There's 200 kobolds in there, and they worship this deep dragon in the caverns underneath. And that's where the emerald is located, actually. And that's why no one's gotten it, because you'd have to go through 200 kobolds and go down into the cavern where a deep dragon exists to get it. So certainly not an easy task, but they also don't have to do it because they already have an emerald. So, you know. Yeah. That's how that's all going. But alright, I think that's enough talking for me. I'm hungry. I'm getting sick of this music. So, more RimWorld, more Pathfinder, more solo role-playing, and Two Brothers Play. And part 1 of SCP-8888 8-Ball tomorrow. But for now, my name is Mangg. This has been Hanging with Mangg. And I'll see you fine folks next week.